Have you ever wanted to be two places at the same time? Whether it's because there was something that you had to do that was conflicting with something you really wanted to do and you just couldn't decide. Being able to be in two places at once is an incredible superpower, and I would know because I was born with it. I'm an identical twin. Growing up, my twin sister, Diana, and I, we weren't the coolest. We loved math and science. We played the violin and the orchestra. We went to band camp, and growing up as Chilean Americans in a very cookie-cutter suburb in the United States, we didn't fit in so well, but we felt so cool with our superpower because we were able to live one life split in two, live two lives at the same time, and see how the different decisions played out. And you bet we took advantage of this. Need to be in two places at once? Don't worry about it. Send your twin. When we were kids, we would switch classrooms, but as we started to get older, that looked like Diana having a big business meeting in Berlin on the same day that she had to renew her passport in Paris. So Diana 1 went to Berlin, and Diana 2, me, stayed in Paris. Can't decide between two really great options? Try them both. When we were kids, it was like sprinkles or gummy bears on top of ice cream. Okay, let's get both and we'll share. And then when we were a bit older and we were trying to decide which Barcelona MBA should we do, we couldn't decide between the two of us. So we're like, let's just try, each tries one. So Diana tried ESADE and I tried IESE. Things worked out pretty well for me, I'd say. But as we grew up and our paths started to take slightly different directions, our superpower was stripped from us, and all of a sudden I had to make decisions on my own. And I don't know how all of you singles have been doing it all this time. It is so hard, especially when I had to make that big decision that so many of you are making now. What do I do with my life next? I had two good options, but extremely different. One was the more traditional route, working for a corporation, a big corporate giant, but also in fashion, which was something that I was actually really passionate for at the time, and I worked really hard to get there. But then I had this very unconventional opportunity to work for a nonprofit, to teach sustainable jewelry classes as a volunteer in the favelas or shanty towns of Brazil. This was a project that kickstarted a year earlier when I went to Rio with a group of IESE students. I fell in love with the arts I saw coming from the community, met the artist, connected with the nonprofit, and it was this opportunity I just couldn't miss. But then I was conflicted, having to make this big decision. Diana had started her new life without me. There I was, couldn't split myself in two, but I did, because I chose both, and I did one right after the other. Pushed back the corporate start date, and I went to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil that summer to volunteer in Complexo do Alemão, Rio's largest and most dangerous favela. And for those that aren't aware, a favela is a marginalized, undocumented community that is built along the hills and mountains very close to the center of the cities. And because of their undocumented nature, they really lack in infrastructure. So you see communities that don't have sewage systems or garbage systems. And also, these are predominantly communities of color. There's racism happening. It's very challenging. And these communities have very special needs, and especially because of the density, all sorts of strange things come up, like transportation. For example, in Complexo do Alemão, it's actually a combination of 14 different favelas, over 100,000 residents at least. And you can't go from one part of the favela or from the city into the favela by ground transportation. So they have a very unique transport system called a teleférico, or some of you might know it as an aerial cable car, like the one you see in Barcelona, or from a ski resort, that takes you from the city into the favela. So on my first day of work, I got these instructions. You're going to take a bus to a microbus, and you're going to go flying in a teleférico, and you're going to arrive in the favela. I somehow made my way there. I got to the teleférico station, and when I stepped into the cabin and the doors closed behind me and we took flight, I felt like I was going off in a spaceship to another planet. Because instead of groomed piste beneath me, if I was at a ski resort, I saw these teeny tiny colorful homes that looked like carnival's confetti had been thrown over the hills. And when I got off on the 5th stop and was taking the winding paths, very humble roads, seeing bullet holes on the sides of buildings, I saw a beautiful mural, and I knew I had reached the school. And when I entered the extremely humble school, I was greeted warmly by this woman named TEDxIESEBarcelona. She is a woman that, since she was 20 years old in the community, had devoted her life to creating a safe space for the kids. Since 1977, she turned her house into a school, and this was the nonprofit. And this is so important because kids in the favelas, they don't get more than 2 hours or 3 hours, if they're lucky, of public schooling a day. So she greeted me in warmly. I was running late, as usual, so we went right up to the classroom where I would be teaching. Humble, humble classroom. It was actually missing a wall completely, open to the outside. We'll call it an open balcony. And I got a view of the entire favela with the silhouette of the teleférico. And in started coming the children as I was unpacking my jewelry tools. And from that moment, it was clear that that summer, I was learning and they were teaching me. I got schooled in my own privilege, understanding what it was like to be a youth growing up in the favela, a youth of color, and in some cases, a non-binary youth of color growing up in this very complicated community. But they brought their best selves every day. We made jewelry from things we found in the streets, from garbage, from recycled things, from rice bags, from CDs. Now you know how old I am, and all sorts of found things. And we had so much fun in that classroom. One day we even converted it into a karaoke bar, basically, because who knew that the kids in the favela loved Justin Bieber as much as kids in the suburbs of Michigan? And when that summer was ending, and so was my funding, and my time was running out for the corporate job, I was completely torn. More torn than I was before I had made the decision, because suddenly I felt like two different people. And I don't know if some of you can relate, because I know a lot of you are focused on impact work, but you have this business persona on one side, and you're trying to climb the ladder and make yourself as successful as you can. And then on the other side, you're trying to create impact in the world. And I started a period of my life that Diana likes to call my life as a yo-yo volunteer, because I went back and forth between the nonprofit and the for-profit world, all around the world, moving 15 times to 8 countries and 4 continents and too many languages, and I was exhausted. I was starting to reflect on my life, and my heart went right back to the classroom with the kids, and I couldn't unlearn what they had taught me. And I also reflected on those who had inspired me most, those in the for-profit world and the nonprofit world, the developing world, the developed world, despite their very different backgrounds. People who had been mentors to me and who had been doing great impact work, I saw that they started to live their lives in a similar way. They were doing what they could from where they were. They had a contribution mindset that was looking for opportunities for impact right where they were, just like Kareem was telling us earlier today, finding areas in their own community to give back. And I've now spent the last 10 years of my career trying to implement these learnings as I work in sustainability and social impact in the fashion world and sitting on the nonprofit boards. And what I want to share with you all today is what I've learned from my experience is that if we want to pick up the pieces, we all have to start contributing, each one of us. But the good news is that we don't have to split ourselves in two in order to do it. I know I don't have to remind anybody in this room about the crises going on. We've been hearing about them today. And you don't have to remind me, because it's basically my job to know about crisis and try to make a solution for it. But it's not all bad news, because doing good is actually good for us. And there's some data to prove, which the former engineer in me makes me very excited, because this is backed up by research. Carnegie Mellon did a research project on cardiac patients and actually saw that those who were volunteering compared with those who weren't actually had lower rates of heart attacks and longer lives. And then a University of Michigan study, my other alma mater, go Blue, they did a study on the correlation between volunteering, and mental health. A very important topic that we keep hearing today, where we saw in the study that those who volunteered had decreased depression levels and increased levels of overall happiness. So it's basically saving our lives. It's reducing depression and anxiety inside of all of us. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in having had felt these feelings before, because we're in what social scientists are calling a purpose crisis, where we're all well aware of all the problems happening in the world, but we don't know where to start. And I've been there. I didn't know where to start, but I was feeling all of this energy of change needing to happen. But from my experience, it starts with active learning. And the active learning leads us to the volunteering, micro opportunities for giving, which leads us to a contribution mindset, back to the active learning. It becomes a cycle that gets larger and larger, and your impact will start to increase. So with active learning, I mean, you're all literally doing it today. By showing up, by listening, by having conversations you wouldn't normally have, by checking your bias, by checking your privilege, expanding your mind, you start to get really important information on different ways that you can start to implement change from yourself. And then once you start to have a little direction there, volunteering in a micro way. I'm not telling you all to go to the favelas, but if you want to go, I know some people. But this is about finding opportunities in your local communities to start giving. Go to a soup kitchen in your neighborhood, or maybe there's a nonprofit school to volunteer at, maybe a volunteer program or a mentorship through work. And once we start to expand our impact, it's very important that we give in a way that works for us. That's to say, we give in a way that basically acknowledges that we have other things going on in our lives. And this is a little bit counterintuitive, because a lot of times when you give until you're depleted, because it's led by passion. But Adam Grant, the psychologist and Wharton professor who wrote the book Give and Take, he did a really interesting study on this, and he proved this exactly, where those who were able to create longer-term impact, he studied firefighters and teachers and various industry folks, were those that gave every day in small ways, but those that also prioritized their own lives. So look for your passions, follow those, and look for local opportunities around you. At the height of the pandemic, when things were crazy for all of us, and they were absolutely crazy where I was working at the fashion retailer, we found ourselves with store closures, sitting on tons of inventory, so my sustainability brain was like, make sure it's not going to the landfill. And then the social impact was, we need to take care of our nonprofit partners. One in particular, Girls Inc., a beautiful nonprofit organization that provides a safe space for young women in inner cities in the United States. And they reach out to hundreds of thousands of girls. And they are predominantly young women of color, and they're usually lacking in opportunities that probably you or I have. And this was very much like the work that I saw with Tia Betchy in the favelas, but at a much larger scale. And when I was trying to figure out how can we help them now, because we used to help them in person all the time, I took my own advice. I started with active learning, and I listened. I heard that there were young women who needed emotional support, they needed economic support, their families were having hard times, and they really just needed someone to talk to. So I got with my team, and we started to figure out some solutions. We realized that our inventory problem that was a problem for us was actually a solution for them. We donated a bunch of product to the young women and the families. We partnered with a tech company to be able to provide mental health toolkits at large scale to hundreds of thousands of young girls and the practitioners. And then we set up these Zoom room mentorship sessions. And I'll never forget, one Saturday morning, I was sitting in my very own kitchen in a Zoom room with a young woman from Girls Inc., and we were chatting, and we connected over our love of music. And when she told me that her favorite artist was Justin Bieber, my head just about exploded, because if I didn't need to hear it again, I heard it that day that I didn't need to be in the favelas of Rio to drive impact, and neither do you. Don't be a yo-yo volunteer. You don't even need to have an identical twin. Do good from where you are with what you have.